Good morning. I'd like to welcome you all to the Joint Board of Managers and Finance Committee meeting. The first agenda is any citizens wishing to address the committee. I'm advised there's none, so we'd move to item number 3 on the agenda. And I know at the board meeting we brag very much about the current chair of this committee, Mr. Steve Montgomery. Y'all bragged on him very well, so I'm looking very forward today to a certain presentation, but Sharon, maybe I could get some accolades at the next board meeting because I've now done 2 of his last 3 meetings. But now Steve is actually out of town. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. If there's no amendments or recommendations on the minutes, I'd entertain a motion for approval. Dr. Weber on the approval, Mr. Zimmerman on the second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. And we'll move us right along then. Sharon, if you'd come up and give us the CFO report, and I think we're going to just ask you to kind of stay there. You've got a lot of things on the agenda, and we'll just work these down.
I do.
Good morning.
Good morning. There's only one person to follow me at the end of the contract, so you're going to see me for a long time this morning. I'd like to take maybe 15 or 20 minutes or whatever the committee would like to spend and go over kind of where we are with where I feel like we will probably end up the year, which really is always the basis for the next year's budget. And I also want to cover some really high level, just bullet points and what assumptions we've made for the 2020 budget, which will help introduce you to my presentation on August 8th. So please feel free to interrupt me and ask questions, especially some of the board members that may not have been through this process before. As Charlie stated at the last board meeting, as we prepare for the budget from a timing standpoint, you will be receiving a pretty long PowerPoint document the Friday before the Thursday meeting on the 8th for your review. You can either spend a lot of time with it, or you can come to the meeting and I will walk you through it at that point in time. We will make ourselves available for calls, but I will also email each one of you my cell phone number, which is always the best way to get a hold of me with questions, and I can field those and involve the right folks from our executive team and get back with you on those. I would much prefer to have those questions answered when I'm doing my presentation on the 8th. I'll be able to kind of weave those answers back in, because if Dorothy has a question on something, it may answer someone else's question as well. So it's always great for me to be able to understand your perspective as I start that.
Sharon, let me interrupt for a quick second, and particularly for Amanda and Zim. What our intention is to give you as board members as much information as you can possibly have. The challenge with a budget is always the timing nature of the budget, because by the time we can close down the fiscal year and get all of our numbers in, it's right up against the time that we need to present both to the county and to you as a board. The county understands that our presentations will always be to a board first, and then the county will review those. But in the meantime, we'll be getting you all as much information as we can possibly do. What we're going to do is those who have been on the board for a while have seen a very standard budget. You all will see that budget for the first time, but we want to walk you through that. And then there are some nuances to this budget that would not be a part of last budget. There may be new initiatives, there may be strategies that we've changed from last time. So we're going to go through those with you and give you as much opportunity from the standpoint of knowledge and understanding what we do. At the same time that we do that with y'all, we're going to do that with the Commissioner's Court as well. And we'll meet with your individual commissioner and go over those aspects of it from a briefing standpoint, so that they can at least know what those numbers are and what the situation is. So that's kind of the process. I know it can be challenging sometimes, but you get to the end of your fiscal year and you do begin to run out of time. If we do it any sooner and you say, why don't you do this in June or why don't you do this in July, we don't have closed books and we don't have all our information in. Right. So it's testy sometime when you literally have 2 to 3 weeks windows of opportunities, but we're going to make that the best as possible as we can. And then certainly at the board meeting for the benefit of the community, being able to tell them what our initiatives are. But those in the community that have watched live streaming can really see our budget on a month-by-month progression as they go through the budget reviews that Sharon provides, and they can kind of see. So just wanted, particularly y'all 2 new members, wanted to give you that update. And we'll include Dr. Simmons in that as well, because I think he joined us last time about a week before the budget. So he just got it hit then. So we'll go through that process.
Good point, Robert.
Thank you, Sharon. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we only have about 3 weeks really to get everything together, but we turn it into 6. So we are working very, very diligently to get through some of those items. Before I start this, I did just want to give you an update. We do have BKD, our external auditors, that have started their interim work here. As a reminder, our year end is September 30th, so they come out for a couple of weeks, do some internal control testing, look at some of our riskier areas like our allowance for accounts receivable, our malpractice, and some of, like I said, some of the larger liabilities that we have on our books. So that is going well, and you will hear from them in December when they wrap up this year's audit. So for projected 19, I'm going to be going over the results for the first 9 months here in the second part of my presentation. But as we look at the operating margin, which is our income before interest income on our investments, we budgeted to be at about $6.8 million by the end of the year. And we're actually going to get to where I think is around 36 million. That's a very large variance, and some of these items down here that I'm going to cover, I'm without my screen today, so just stick with me. And this is not on your portal, this is just on the screen. So there are some large variances that we actually received a pickup this year. Last year, if you remember, some of these numbers were negative. This year, I'm assuming that we're going to be at the same prior year level, but there is some risk in this number. The 36 million, unless something comes up in the next week or 2, will be the number, the comparative number that we use for the budget 2020 comparison. So that's why I'm going to spend some time on this today. If you look at where we're at in June, the medical center will be just under $20 million through June. That averages out to be about $6.5 million per quarter. The reason that we're going to have some of these pickups is a couple of those items on this page will be booked at year end only. So we will have some a much bigger fourth quarter. So throughout the year, our net patient revenue is going to be about 2.4 million higher than we expected. We have had several real improvements during the collection phase and process. That's all hands on deck, from registration to nursing posting charges, the clinics getting their charges in. And that is actually offset by some lower outpatient volumes across the house. So just in net revenue alone, we've had a $2.4 million pickup this year compared to the budget. Our operating margin has also been impacted by the 340B retail program that we started this year. You've heard me talk about that for the last few months. That is going to add about $7 million to our bottom line, and that's been booked throughout the year. The next big piece is in our supplemental funding revenue, and this is where I start to put a few qualifiers in, as I estimate a pickup of $5.6 million by the end of the year. We will not receive our final UC numbers until late August or early September from the state. It's very complex in the way that the formula funding impacts a proportional share of the dollars. So we can easily estimate what's going to happen if everything else remained the same and we changed a few factors, what would we receive and UC. But that's not what happens. Everybody redoes that calculation at the same time, and then we get a proportional share of that change. So we may increase our uncompensated care dollars, our cap, but if someone else or the majority of the people increase more, we actually get a decline in UC revenue because that pool is fixed. And that's how the formula funding works.
To give you guys an idea, just a reminder, that UC payment has always been for the last couple of years, an unfortunate surprise for us. And what will happen, to Sharon's point, it's a fixed sum of money. It is a set sum. It is a pie of X amount of dollars. What the state did 2 years ago is they allowed city ambulance services and others to participate in that fund, so the dollar amount stayed the same, but the amount of participation increased. So the state could say, we're giving the same money we've always given, but the allotment to us was significantly reduced because a decision was made to allow municipalities to be a participant in that program. That's neither here nor there. It's not who they include in, and we don't get a voice in that. It's just what we get back from the state is oftentimes reduced or changed, and we won't know until oftentimes our budget is passed. Mm-hmm. And that's been a challenge because people say, well, why didn't you know you're going to have $8 million less? We won't know that from the state because we don't know who's going to participate in the fund. That's a state decision. So, and that's not a situation where we have an input in the participation levels of who gets a slice of the pie or a percentage of the pie.
So it is a very interesting calculation. I will kind of take you through my summary of what happens because we'll likely be talking about it again in September. But with the pool of dollars that the state starts with, they go through and they allocate it proportionately by pool. So there's 5 pools. There's the large publics, which we're a part of, the small publics, the private hospitals. There is an ambulatory pool that Robert mentioned and a smaller physician pool. Once those allocations have been made, that's what we call the pie. And then from the large public standpoint, there's 7 or 8 participants within that pie. And so depending on what our operating expenses are doing relative to Parkland, San Antonio, Houston, determines on how much of that pie that we may receive. It's not consistent and it is not a set amount. So, and this increase actually gets us back to what we received in fiscal year 18. For those of you who were here, if you recall, the 18 budget, we got the bad news on the ambulatory calculation. We took it down to the preliminary number. The state realized that there was an adjustment that needed to be made. So we recovered part of that immediately, and we think we'll probably get back up to that FY18 level. So the budget and that $6.8 million is probably conservative based on the information that we got just before the final budget approval happened a year ago in September. We also have small decreases in DSRIP as the metrics have changed, and also in DISH, the DISH pool has been decreasing over the last few years. So that's the main driver of that decline. But overall, a $5.6 million pickup, probably booked as a year-end entry in September. In other operating revenue, we did get a pickup. The public hospitals were able to receive a new pool of funding for GME from Medicaid this year, and we got just over $3 million for that. Tobacco revenue is, I tend to, well, I always budget that conservatively. We have a trust that gets paid out pretty much based on your ad valorem proportional share here in Texas. So the large publics enjoy a large part of that tobacco revenue fund. It was put into a trust at the state more than a decade ago, and that corpus declined somewhat. So we are never guaranteed to receive anything but the corpus. However, the last few years, they have put some general funds back into the tobacco revenue trust so that it kind of made up for that decline in the corpus value. So from that extra general funding, we get about $2 million a year, but it's not guaranteed. So if you looked at my 19 budget, it was closer to $5 million and not $7 million that we actually received a check for. And I will do the same thing in our 2020 budget, knowing that we will receive that flat amount, but not knowing if we will get that additional amount until it's paid out. There's also a decrease in the ad valorem related to tax adjustments that are occurring this current year. So usually we receive very close to what the certified tax rolls are showing. This year, Tarrant County has had a multitude of requests for reappraisal of their property, and through those protests, it's gone back a few years. About half of that $3 million is related to mineral interest and the valuation that had been assessed on some of their equipment that is taxed and produces revenue for the county and the other entities. That went back for 5 years. So they had to recoup about $1.5 million just from JPS to respond to that unfavorable settlement. So that's just a one-time thing, and you'll see some of my assumptions on the property tax revenue on the next slide for 2020. Our purchase services, we have had a savings of about $8.5 million this year from things that we budgeted to buy that we have not spent. It is a very long list. Some of those are changes that we made to our outside medical service process and those expenses that we incur. Some of them are delays in projects. Some of it is consulting that we have been able to decrease. And I have to believe that most of the outcomes this year are from work that we started 18 months ago, 12 months ago, that are beginning to show some savings for our operations. And then we also have about 4.4 that is another really long list of items that are in medical supplies. Again, we've got lots of initiatives around savings for those and some of our other expense categories. So that is kind of the story that I would tell you for projected 19 and the variances that we will likely see in September. The biggest risk on that page is the supplemental funding revenue. It could go up, it could go down. Any questions? Okay, yeah.
I may not be asking the right question, but I think this related to children's. Weren't they considering Medicaid uncompensated care lost and that something along those lines?
So there was a lawsuit that was filed, it had to have been 10 to 12 years ago by Texas Children's, and the way that the dish factor and the uncompensated care was calculated, how you got your proportional share and the cost that was unreimbursed. They filed that lawsuit and went all the way up to CMS, and kind of unexpectedly, they actually, CMS granted them the extra dollars in their cap that they had requested. So that's caused a pretty large recalculation going back through. We have started to quantify that, and I think we have reserved for much of that. A lot of that questionable redistribution, we did not book on a yearly basis. We just left it. The state was withholding about 5% of the payment until this lawsuit got settled. So I don't know that that's going to have a big impact on our books because we booked it very conservatively. Does that make sense? We never recognized the revenue that they were withholding to settle the case.
I just can't remember how much it was. I mean,
It was a really large amount. I don't have that number in front of me either. It was over a, 5-8 year period, which just compounded things.
so they still get credit. I mean, it hadn't changed.
Well, they did win the lawsuit. I don't know that those funds have been completely distributed yet. But the children's hospitals were arguing that supplemental commercial plan should not be offsetting to a Medicaid primary patient, because it actually showed them as making money on that, and it reduced their overall cap on what they were not reimbursed, the cost of care. So you might have one account that was profitable and the next account that didn't have any payment, and the way that the overall calculation worked is that they would take that profit from patient A and it would reduce the cost of care on patient B. And so they were getting, it was unfavorable when you looked at it that way. So we're still working through that final distribution from a state standpoint.
I mean, does this 40 million?
Overall, that would not be the JPS side.
I was gonna say, goodness gracious.
No. If that were to us, you would have heard a little bit more about it.
Yes.
Yeah. No. This meeting will be a lot longer if that's to us.
And the reason that I'm not talking about that a lot is because it impacted both UC and DISH. One of those, we booked conservatively, and we did not recognize that revenue in the first place. The second one, we already had a reserve in place, so if the lawsuit was not favorable, it would still not impact, we wouldn't have to record a negative impact in the current year. So we never recognized the revenue, so we don't have to have a loss from that revenue.
I got you.
It's a good question.
Thank you.
Sure.
Sharon, when I see a budget of 6.8 million and a projected reality of 36 million, it sends up some kind of red flashes. And I know you're trying to explain it, but for example, you're talking about savings and supplies, depreciation. I don't know how to evaluate 4.4 because I don't know what the total budget was, whether.
Close to $1 billion.
Close to $1 billion?
Yes, sir.
Okay. But that kind of information helps us determine the magnitude, because anytime you don't spend on facility equipments and whatnot like that, it sends a red flag that maybe we're gonna have a bigger problem the next year or the next 2 years after that, because
Right.
equipment's getting outdated and things like that. So just as a suggestion.
So as you speak about equipment, I have had sidebars with Mr. Petty, and I'll be working, after we get the budget approved, we'll be working on a study for him on facilities and age of equipment there. So it's a good point.
That's a huge, it's a huge
number up there versus the budget that we
It
projected.
is, and I do want to continue to point out of that $29 million variance, 10 million of that is related to the uncompensated care issue that we've, the formula funding and the swings that we've seen in that. I would say probably within the first quarter of the year, we realized that because of this state formula funding with the ambulance pools, we would receive a much larger amount than what was in the budget. So,
Yeah, leaving at 19 million, that's still a pretty large miss from the
It is.
projected budget.
it is. When you're budgeting almost a break even, any miss is relatively large, yes.
It's better that way than
It
the other
is.
way, but
Last
still.
year, these positive and negatives were flipped. So, it's a good perspective. So I'm gonna stay on the medical center side, and we're gonna talk a little bit about some of the bigger budget assumptions that we've made. There are 2 slides here, that I will roll through. Right now, as of the June estimated numbers, we will have about a $33 million increase, which is about 7% on ad valorem taxes. We have not finalized on the certified tax rolls, but that will be done before the budget is mailed out. And so I think that number will not go down, but it's right at the June valuation numbers. Supplemental funding, again, DSRIP is continuing to shrink the pool that is paid out of. And then the achievement's getting harder and harder. So the first year was kind of an easy slide in, had a lot more to do with reporting and have you checked the box and done what you said you were gonna do. As we move through this new DSRIP program for the next 3 years, we will see a shift from the easy reporting achievement to a much harder metric result. So we are also expecting about a $9 million increase there, a decrease.
Could you give me an example of what that might be?
So in the current year, the new DSRIP program just kind of renewed itself and kicked off again. We were able to go in and do achievable metrics, and some of those metrics that I remember are breast cancer screenings and, kind of focusing on improving the health of our population. Are we as a healthcare delivery system doing good things for the uninsured to get better outcomes? Mm-hmm. Some of those make up to the AIP plan that Bill talks about periodically and we cover in HR. But in the early year, and this happened with the prior DSRIP reporting structure, the first year is more about, did you submit a report? Not necessarily did you hit a certain percentage or achievement, but did you turn in your report? Did you do what you said you were going to do in your plan? Then that achievement starts to turn in more into a performance metric in the later years, and the weightings change slightly, so it's harder to get the same dollars. So it's harder to get the same dollars, and the pool is slightly shrinking over the next 3 years. So that's what's producing that decline.
But does that mean we're not gonna meet the metrics? Or?
No, it's just the way that the program is designed, and that bar is continually raised in order to get your payment.
Are they looking at more outcomes now?
Yes, in year 2, it will be much more outcome driven versus reporting and just, again, submitting a report.
But isn't outcome driven where we wanna be?
Yes,
It is, and
yes.
it's where we are, and it's where we're headed. That bar just constantly moves. You relate it to an analogy of an Olympiad, and I jump over a 16-foot bar, and that's where I'm at, then they say, okay, now jump the 17 bar, now jump the 18 bar. And we have to constantly get to that level of improving from the year before. And that becomes challenging when you move from spot to spot. And it's not that we're not meeting those outcomes are constantly going to change to improve us and all the other organizations. It's the right thing to do, and we support it 100%. It's just, you constantly, in order to stand on the medal stand, you got to constantly raise that bar.
No, I understand that, but that's where we want to be.
Yes.
Exactly. And that's
Yes,
where we're
it's
headed, and that's what we're
moving-
doing.
It's moving more into pay for performance. And a lot of these metrics, it's not that you just had an easy year the first year. A lot of the metrics that we had the first cycle of DISRIP changed. You know, I don't have the count, but half of them stayed the same and half of them changed. So we have to get reporting in place. We have to get the good baseline established. So a lot of it is done with a lot of thought. It's not just submission of a report and you're in. It's giving you a year to establish some of those processes and controls that you need for years 2, 3, 4.
Will we see any of those summaries, or is that getting down too low?
No, you will see those, and you see them throughout the year on our performance levers. It's baked into our system on our annual incentive programs, the destination metrics, and others. We can break them out any which way you want them to see. And we could have, I think what might be helpful is just to show you DISRIP dollars and what's happening with DISRIP dollars specific. So, because sometimes when it's part of the bigger picture, you can't specifically see the DISRIP side of it. We'll be happy to do that.
We can schedule that at either, wherever it fits best, finance, quality.
Yeah,
Or-
it crosses all lines, so we will have no problem doing that.
Right, but as we get to population health and value-based payments, that's where we want to be, is at the top.
Yes, sir. Mhm.
It's the right thing to do.
I think we can approach it from financial quality, but I think you may want to take it on quality first. Let's make sure that we don't impact patient care. Then we can figure out the financial impact of that.
Mhm.
Now, that's sort of the challenge for Michael and Diana, I think quality should drive it.
Because you have to look outside of our four walls also as well, because the post-acute care will catch you. And so it's gonna go, because if we focus on our own people only, you can pick up things, but you won't get the momentum that you need for the foundation when you look at the post-acute care. That's where the abuse is a lot. Unreported. It's a black hole right there. And then the optimization of it. How do you optimize the network that way?
But we have the JPS connection, and we should be able to manage that, don't you think?
Well, what you'll see in the next budget is that very thing. You'll see our efforts as we advance as an organization to better manage the population as a part of population health, but managing those that are in the connection program.
Right.
Far greater than what we have. And I think as the organization advances and our services advance, we're more able to do that. And you'll see that in the budget. You'll see that reflected when we present the budget in a couple of weeks.
One of the things is that it's an investment into the new paradigm shift from managing lives versus fee for service. There are going to be some investment that may bring our financial dollar amount, the margin down a little bit before it gets better, because you have two crew who wants to reach out and impact people before it gets worse, and then the other one still fee for service. So there's some investment dollar that we're going to have to discuss with the leadership team to support them. Because if we don't support and we're trying to make ends meet and go to the other side, the yield's not going to be there, and it's going to be a lot of headache and heartache and long hours for the leadership team and the medical team, and it's almost like, step up a dollar, pick up a penny. So we learn how to walk that fine line and support them correctly.
Okay, so more to come on DISRIP at a later meeting. We also are focusing on rev cycle opportunities. And again, rev cycle goes all the way from scheduling to charge entry, making sure pre-certification is done, maximizing coding opportunities, documentation within the medical record. It is all encompassing. And we have about $5 million of net additional collections that will impact our bottom line for several strategies that we've implemented. And Rory McCready, the VP of Rev Cycle, is leading a lot of those. So that is going to really help our 2020 budget. Also, we continue to look at utilization, care management, levels of care, appropriate levels of discharge. There's lots and lots of different items that are going on and being implemented around that. We have our third MRI functional in October of 19, so that produces a little bit of extra revenue as we're able to, that is a net new MRI, so they're finishing up construction now. One of the new items is a specialty pharmacy. These are the high-cost drugs. You might have them in oncology, Hep C, and HIV drugs are probably the three biggest categories of that. And we're going to create our own specialty pharmacy so we can capture some of those prescriptions and fill them ourselves. So that will be a new service that is actually profitable for next year. We have a slight increase in emergency department visits. If you recall, we are opening up 12 new rooms, and we also have 14 additional chairs that we'll be able to see patients at. So it's 26 treatment areas that will be in the emergency department. You've heard Robert mention in prior meetings that our left without being seen has kind of gone up a bit with all of the volume that is going through. And although we are not really increasing new volume, we did make an assumption that that left without being seen rate would stay within the ED, and that produced about a 2% increase, or about 2,600 visits throughout the year.
Looks like you just have more space for boarding.
No, actually, we hope, actually not. If you don't really want to create a system, we have such narrow situations in the ED. It is so hard, but if we do have more space, it will help. The challenge really is, and you know perfectly well, Chuck, the problem is how you deal with the admits. And we have, what y'all as board members need to understand, which Dorothy and you understand, is those patients you can't discharge. You've got a social commitment to those because you have a patient that needs some form of skilled nursing or whatever the case, and as a no-pay patient, there aren't many folks in town that want them. So it's a real challenge for us.
Most of the other areas from a volume perspective have been left relatively flat, although we did slightly increase the primary care visits. The full year impact of the retail 340B program will impact next year's budget as well. It didn't really get kicked off until the second quarter of the year. We have the cancer center that moved, and we've added a second LINAC for treatment. So there's some additional dollars as well as expenses for the full year of that relocation. We continue to design and plan for some of our new master facility projects that we talked about at the last planning committee. We also are creating a long-term strategic vision around population health, the referral process, how you get into JPS, and what type of IT costs will have to be incurred to support those strategies and hook it back up to our electronic medical record. We have cost savings in both the employee healthcare costs as well as supply chain that we will continue to build in and bake into the 2020 budget. So those are going to be some of the highlights that I think you can look forward to in a couple of weeks when you see our overall budget for the medical center. Very quickly, I want to look at a claim. A claim is a lot less complex. These providers are the ones that provide the care within the hospital walls and in our clinic settings for outpatient. For 19, I'm budgeting about a $22 million loss compared to a $23.6 million loss. We lost about $5 million per quarter through June, and this would show the fourth quarter at being just over $6.5 million. So theirs is much more linear. I also like to look at a claim on how many providers do we have. The medical center has dozens of volume indicators that are driving a lot of our income and expenses. But a claim is really focused around the employment and contracting with those physicians. So number of providers has actually increased a little bit. And when you combine that with the positive variance, I'm projecting the loss per provider to be closer to $47,000 compared to $51,000 budget. So that kind of right sizes those. They are onboarding a lot of providers in the last quarter, and we had a higher amount of medical and medical director and coverage fees in the first of the year, and as they cap out, that revenue will not continue. So. For their budget, about a 6% encounter growth for some of the added physicians during 19. The infusion center and oncology impacts their staffing as well. During this current year, we created some psychiatric medical coverage in the emergency department for enhanced quality of care. We are also expanding the ENT coverage with additional physicians. We are continuing to employ the surgeons and converting them from a contracted status. I've already mentioned the 30 net during the last quarter that were onboarded. And the transition of care connections, the street medicine, those items that Joel Hunt does outside of True Worth, and the home visit program is transitioning from the medical center to the physician network. And that is the end of that report, unless you have any questions for me.
Any additional questions for Sharon at this time? And I think Sharon, again, I think I'll just implement this here. Robert, we've talked, I know Steve's not here today, obviously, but especially to Zim and Amanda, and you indicated this, Robert, that we're going to do the very same process we had used last year. That's like the day 7 of the 11 board members are here today to see this preliminary. Final will be coming out to everybody, but you're also going to break down into some smaller informational issues with the board also to get around to them prior to any vote on the board.
Yes, sir. And
Yeah.
the goal would be, the difference from past years
Yes.
is to be able to break down for the newer members that, Dorothy, for you in particular, in some of the questions that you may have, to be able to go through those, because Sharon nor I nor anybody on the team think it's fair to just send you a budget and say,
Right.
read through this and vote on it in 2 days. It's very difficult. So we're going to take every minute that we have and budget that time between court members and board members to give as much insight as we can possibly give on the budget and why things from a staff recommendation were put where they are. And we'll be happy to meet with some of the physician leadership as well as we sort of go through this process and try to understand why the numbers are what they are and what we project and what we don't. To your point, Zim, it's a little bit of I shouldn't say different than some of the other budgets you've seen at the city level, but our margins are very razor thin, and there are some key dollars that we truly don't have control over, and we don't have control of the time, which is the most difficult, especially when you look at a budget when 40% of your budget probably has the greatest degree of stability coming from local property taxes, but then the other 40% of your budget is a federal pass-through dollar, which is constantly in a political court sort of bouncing around quite a bit. And then not only is it from the federal guidelines, but then the state's interpretation of those guidelines for the various pools. And then that last 20% being our efficiencies or changes in our payer mix, up or down. So we'll go through that process with you as we sort of look through it the best we can, particularly y'all's first time at looking at a budget of $1 billion+ and where we go and what we are. It does, Zim, maybe to help you to some extent, it does have a little bit of a state budget-esque kind of feel to it, because there are certain things in a state budget that are mandated by either court rulings or other things. Our budget is very similar to certain things that we truly have to fund, and then what do you have flexibility with beyond that, and we'll talk about those. Thank you, Charlie.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. Again, the point being that, you know, the intent is not to have a budget that's coming to this board on the 8th. You only see it on the Friday before, and as we've indicated previously, Sharon and staff will be working right up to the end with modifications and changes. But the idea is also, especially, and again, to all 11 board members or the 10 other board members, I've talked to Robert and talked to Steve, you'll be being reached out to even ahead of that to see if there's any one-on-one, two-on-two, whatever we can, to where it's, again, informational, so you can go ahead and start asking questions and seeing it prior to even when you get the final one out on the 2nd. So, again, more to come.
Hey, Sharon, can you send out the PowerPoint that you did the last time on the overview, and then this one as well to us?
You bet.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yes. Be
We'll
glad
put
to.
it on the portal for you.
That'd be a good idea. Then there being no additional information or questions to Sharon at this time, Sharon, would you go ahead and start the item number 5A, which is the June numbers?
Sure.
Well, you've got them.
The story for this month is our inpatient numbers are really strong. Outpatient have some of those ancillary services are below budget, and that's kind of been the trend all year. So our admissions are up by about 4%. Our case mix index is just slightly under the budget, as you can see in the bottom left, and our length of stay is about 2% over budget, but you can see the trend there as it is coming back down much closer to budget. Our ED was extremely busy. We were 6% over budget, so we continue those high volumes. And urgent care, due to some of the process changes that we've had over the last 3 to 4 months, you can see that there's a downward trend there. Some of it has to do with the acuity that is coming into the urgent care. There are also probably issues with how we are taking folks in that have psychiatric issues. So we are aware of that trend, and it will probably stay lower for the fourth quarter. Our primary care visits are slightly under, and our specialty care visits are slightly above our budget. Invasive labs at the top right looks unusual. We usually have 1 month that is low during the summer, and we did have some physicians, vascular surgeons that were out. So given the small department that is, we're talking about a real number of about 600 to 700 cases in lab. If one of those physicians is out, you will see a drop in your actual. Inpatient surgeries, you can see by that blue line on the bottom left, is very high. Actually, they're about 24% ahead of their budget, and outpatient surgeries are only about 6% under where we expected them to be, also impacted by physicians that were out for a period in June. Our psych inpatient is strong, 3% compared to our budget. Our psych emergency visits are down slightly by about 5%. Again, we do have a new onboarding process, so some of those might end up in the ED, whereas historically, they may have ended up in the PEC. From a financial standpoint, our days cash on hand is at 208 right now, almost even to where it was last year. And our net AR days are at 47. Our FTEs per adjusted patient day continue to be favorable, and again, this is a year-to-date for 9 months. So we have been really consistent as far as those flexed targets are concerned. I'm gonna skip the payer mix. Our JPS connection enrollment continues to increase. This is as high as we've been for a couple of years now. We added 217 to the roster, which was a nice increase for June. Another busy numbers page. I will tell you, kind of skipping down to the bottom, we came in about $1.4 million ahead of a break-even budget for the month of June. A lot of that had to do with, again, the 340B retail program. We just did not get the volume assumption right on that. We've got a lot more volume there than was budgeted for. That impacts the other operating revenue overage that you see there, but there are some offsetting expenses. But most of our bottom line is from that program, along with some overage in our patient revenue and a few savings in supplies. Our year-to-date for the medical center comes to that $19.9 million that I mentioned in my earlier presentation, or about $15 million ahead of the budget for the first 3 months. For the first 9 months, we've got 3 months to go. On the acclaim side, we have build encounters that were a little bit under. Again, it's the summer months. We try our best to budget for those decreases, but it did trend down this month. While our net operating expense per encounter on the bottom right of the page is right on budget. It is at 100% of where we budgeted that to be. And skipping on to the acclaim income statement for June, you can see towards the bottom an operating margin of $558,000 compared to a loss of $1.4 million. So they outperformed their budget by almost $900,000 this month. That brings their year-to-date to a loss of $15.1 million compared to a budget of $17.9 million. Again, a lot of the variance here is just based on how many providers are employed in acclaim. They onboarded 16 providers this month, which is creating that overage in salaries. And then they, again, as I spoke earlier, they're going to be onboarding about 30 new physicians in the last quarter of this year. So from a consolidated standpoint, I skipped a page. Well, I'll just talk about it. From a consolidated standpoint, we have had, again, a good year. We're in a positive amount. If you looked at that combined income statement year to date, our income from operations is $5.7 million. We had budgeted to be at about a $12 million loss, which wouldn't be sustainable long-term, but we knew at that last-minute UC change, we went ahead and accepted that loss, although the bottom line is at a break even. Are there any questions? I've been talking a long time.
Any questions for Sharon? And Zim, I agree with you, if the numbers are off, I like them better to the positive, but again.
Even Aggie can figure that out.
And Aggie can figure that out also. But anyway, any questions for Sharon? Again, we're gonna see a lot of numbers between now and August the 8th. So again, Sharon, I know you and your staff, and the entire staff appreciate all your input. If there's no questions, any additional questions this time on item 5A, I entertain a motion for approval.
Move to approve.
I have a motion by Mr. Zimmerman, a second by Mr. D.T. Wynn. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Sharon, if you wouldn't mind, we have 3 agreements. If you just go ahead and cover those.
I have 2 managed care contracts for your consideration. The first one, I've lost my agenda, but hopefully you're tracking along with me. The first one is with Cook Children's Health Plan. This is kind of a combined agreement. Part of it is a renewal for 2 existing plans that we have with them for the STAR and CHIP program. But this contract is also adding a new component for STAR kids, which are kind of the more severely handicapped population. So if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer, but this is an existing relationship, just expanding into a new program as well.
Any questions for Sharon on this one? If not, I entertain a motion. I have a motion by Mr. Wynn, a second by Mr. Bose. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Appreciate it very much. Sharon, item number C,
I am very excited to present the Humana Military Contract, which is also known as TRICARE. There are 4 products of TRICARE. There's Prime, Select, Reserve, and Life. This will put all of those programs in network. The medical center will be in network, as well as the physicians have a corresponding contract. So
I want y'all, as board members, to realize that rarely does a CFO say, I'm very excited. But the other part of that is Kelly, who's in the back, and Sharon and her team have done an incredible amount of work to get that. That's not easy. So it's a 2-sentence presentation to the board. It's a huge impact to a variety of patients that we at JPS can now put under our umbrella, which we are proud to do. So to you and Kelly and staff, congratulations. That wasn't easy.
again, congratulations. Is there any other discussion for Sharon on this item?
Quick question.
Yes,
when will
Dr.
this be
Ziegler.
effective?
It usually takes about 60 to 90 days to get the physicians onboarded, so I can get back with you on that, but a lot of it just depends on that time frame. Sometimes it's faster, sometimes it takes more time.
Any other questions? If not, entertain a motion. Motion by Mr. Wynn, second by Mr. Bose. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Thank you very much. Item number D, between Tarrant County and Resource Connection Tarrant County.
Yeah, so this is a lease renewal for space that we've had for a long time. This location, which is kind of at the northwest corner of 35 and 20, if you're familiar with it, we call it our South Campus. We have a relatively large clinic out there for our population, the South Campus. That is about 80% of the square footage, and about 20% is in another building on the same campus for our call center. And we have a 1-year lease term with the option to have 4 one-year renewals. And we can renew either one or both of those locations.
And Sharon, I'll just say this, I know this is a 1 year, like we've done a lot of stuff in anticipation of what master plan, what may ultimately come to this board for approval. And so again, we point this out, this is a 1 year with certain options, obviously protect us, but it also gives us flexibility should we elect to do something else. Any other questions for Sharon? If not, entertain a motion. I have Mr. Bose on the motion, Reverend Emerson on the second. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Sharon, thank you very much. That was a lengthy presentation. Again, I know you got a lot of work to do, you and staff. Thank you very much for everything.
Just for the record, Sharon has not slept or eaten in 3 weeks, so thank you very much.
Well, between now and August the 8th, I guess she's going to need to keep that same schedule. She will.
If we let her sleep, we've lost her,
That's
so we
right.
just keep her away from it.
Item number 5E, Dr. Duncan, good afternoon. Approval of purchase agreement between Tarrant County Hospital District and the JPS Health Network and all
Good
that.
morning.
Good morning.
First of all, I'd like to just address your question around our district work. I do oversee all of our district work here. We have a district office, and I would very much like to come and speak to the board about how we shifted from our District 1.0 project to our District 2.0 outcome. We've moved all our metrics onto a population health dashboard that does get reported up to quality, and are working with our physicians. A lot of busy activity led by physicians around our district work. We have some amazing outcomes. I would love to come and present those. So,
Dr. Duncan, I'll just pass on the fact to not only to Head of Quality and also Head of Finance that you certainly made that, and I feel like that'd be a great presentation.
okay.
We'll look forward to that. Thank you.
Look forward. With that said, I come before you to ask your approval for the purchase and installment of purchase and replacement of our 3D diagnostic mammography units. Our current units were placed in 2010, so they are way past their useful life. As you know, with technology and design changes that are happening every day, we are pretty much ready to replace these. We did undergo an RFP process. We had 4 vendors respond to the RFP, which was great. The top 2 scores, we had come and do presentations to a group of our radiologists, our mammography techs, our IT team, and our operations team. So it was a really good evaluation team. We looked at quality, we looked at safety, we looked at ease of how easy it is for our technicians to use the equipment, and more importantly, we looked at the comfort that it provides for our women or for our patients. So with that said, I'd very much like to replace these machines and ask for your approval.
You
Good.
had them at hello, so.
Yeah, you really did. Go ahead, DT.
Uh-huh.
Probably you guys already covered for it. Is this, since we go from 2D to 3D, is that going to change our net reimbursement, higher, lower? Do we have any impact on our?
Say that again, DT? You lost
He's
me.
asking about
Because
reimbursement.
it's a 2D to 3D, is the cost on it?
So we actually did upgrade to 3D, so we do not see that that would, so these machines were upgraded to 3D.
Right,
As far as reimbursement, we would not see that that would change.
Doesn't go up?
I can follow up with you, but I do not think that they pay for the 2D
3D.
versus 3D. We're not reimbursed differently for that unless things have changed.
Okay.
But I'll follow up and get back.
Okay. And then in terms of accessibility, is that,
No, I believe it.
is there a lot of changes to go into that PAC system, or is it automatically done behind the scene with no interruption from a reading perspective?
It will go through the same way through our PACS for our radiologists to read in real time.
Question, Dr. Duncan? If not, I entertain a motion. Got all kind of motions. I got Reverend Emerson on the motion. Second on by Mr. Wynn. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Congratulations.
No, thank you very much.
And we'll look forward to your presentations, both in quality and finance.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Dr. Duncan. Appreciate it. Thank you. That brings us to item number 6, which is report of legal counsel, which is the normal report each month. Scott, anything you have?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Yes, sir. In June, there were 26 contracts under $500,000. Those are posted to your board portal for your review. That would conclude our report, sir.
Okay. Which would then bring us down really to, is there any other information to come before the Finance Committee at this time? Again, you're going to be looking at a lot of numbers here in the next few weeks, and I appreciate the time and commitment each of you give to that. I know Steve does also.
We don't have executive
Yes.
matters for y'all today.
Yep.
And the other thing is, if we're going to try to be as flexible as we can with time to get with y'all, Suzanne will be setting those times up, and we'll do whatever we can to put slots in. The only consideration I would ask y'all is we're trying to also slot in 5 elected officials, and that is interesting too. That's an interesting process. But we will do all that in a limited amount of time.
Yes.
I don't know I don't know what's harder, doing the budget for Sharon or actually setting up the meetings to discuss the budget, but the meetings, I think the meetings are.
Yes,
more
we went on
challenging.
a lot of those last year also. But,
So-
and again, I'll say this now, I will be going through one of those meetings like everyone else. I may not make all of them, because obviously certain things we have to worry about the numbers of us and all that. But if there's anything you see in the budget that, if I'm not at the meeting where you're speaking with Robert or staff, please reach out to me, and I'll certainly keep that for the upcoming budget process. But if there's not any other business to come before the Finance Committee, and Ralph, I'm gonna kid you on this one, Steve got a lot of accolades last board meeting, and I went back and checked the minutes. He adjourned at 11:51. So I'm happy to say that this was a very efficient, and I appreciate everybody's input. We had 7 of our 11 board members here, and there being no additional business to come forward this board, we stand adjourned at 11:11. How about that one? Done.